everybody to Psychedelics today, a Solidarity Friday episode, recording on July 1, Stan Groff's birthday.
Happy birthday, Stan.
Yeah, happy birthday, Stan. Coming out on July 3rd, 2020. So how are you doing, Kyle?
Good, Joe. How are you doing?
Lovely, beautiful day here in Colorado yet again. Go figure.
Nice.
Yeah. It's 80, so it makes me a little nervous. I don't like to see it go above that, but we'll see. So,
yeah, it's been pretty nice and warm here on the East Coast. I think we need a little rain, though.
Yeah, I don't like those droughts on the East. It's a little awkward.
Yeah.
So things are getting a little crazy out here. We're talking about issuing fines now for people without masks. I think they're doing that in Aspen. They might do it here in Breckenridge. It's just such a tourist location. Like Texas is not doing so well with containment, and there's a lot of Texan tourists coming up. So we're a little nervous about the spread here. And with a, pretty substantial death toll, like, for the total population, this isn't that serious, but for those infected, I read in a Scientific American article that the US is seeing roughly 6% of those with confirmed infections die.
Mm.
And that doesn't really factor in kind of serious injury and lung damage, stuff like that, beyond that. So it's a little awkward. I'm starting to get nervous again, though I was starting to feel really liberal a few weeks ago. I'm like, uh-oh, what do we do? So I don't know. I'm getting a little mentally stressed about it long term. Was thinking about doing some inner work in the future, but I might kind of just calm down on that. Let stuff ride. Maybe just take meditation more seriously or something, instead of doing a deep dive.
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird. I was reading something about, some of the lung damage some of the survivors have had from COVID, and that looks actually really scary as well. So even if you survive it, if you have that really, really extreme case, possible permanent lung damage doesn't look too good. And I think here in New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, they're trying to mandate 2-week quarantine for anybody in 14 or 16 states. Any of those states are having a huge increase. So yeah, it's interesting. I thought this was definitely going to be over. Well, not over, but just slowing down, and just seeing it kind of pick back up. It definitely is a little bit concerning. But on the one end, there's like parts of me, I think, since it's like slowing down here in New Jersey, feeling a little bit more like liberal, maybe, I guess, as you're saying. But at the same time, just watching everything else. And there's just so much information out there to chew through. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. And what does the mental toll of all this stuff look like long term? I think not good. And I think we're already seeing some breaks from it.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen anything about suicide rate increase or anything like that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see that pretty soon.
There were a few articles, I think, that more locally that I was coming across that were coming out of New Jersey. Suicide and overdoses increased. I forget the percentage, but there was a huge concern about that as well. And I think as maybe more states possibly start to lock down again, if that is something that some states are looking at, I mean, you could. I mean, it was weird. I went out to an outdoor bar a few weekends ago, a Father's Day week. Or was that weekend? Yeah. An old friend of mine from high school came home, and I haven't seen him in a few years. And yeah, why not? And it was weird. I mean, psychologically, to just kind of like go out with a mask on and sit outside and just interacting with the world in that way. I've noticed the psychological impact that this has had. And then just trying to navigate this world with like new restrictions and like rules of like, always having to wear this mask and keeping 6 feet apart. And it is very strange. It's like, will that feeling ever kind of go away of like, is it going to be safe to just go out and socialize like we normally did? And I just think about like a few months ago when that was just like so part of the routine. And now all of a sudden it's more of like this conscious thing where you go, okay, how am I going to interact with people? How am I showing up in public, wearing the mask, keeping that social distancing? It's very strange psychologically.
Mm-hmm. I watched some people yesterday act like they were going to hug, and then they caught themselves and slowly backed away from each other. I thought that was great. I was like,
I've given a few hugs, I'll have to admit.
it's an addiction. It's human connection stuff. What's the real drug here? It's tough. So let's dig in. I had a very long conversation with Zoe Helene from Cosmic Sister yesterday. I got to chat with Chris Kilham a little bit. Coronavirus in the Amazon came up. And we had this article, was it BBC that we looked at? Pull it up for a sec.
NPR.
There's an NPR article, yeah. Title, The Coronavirus is Spreading Through Indigenous Communities in the Amazon. So Brazil's got an extraordinarily high rate of infection. It's going through indigenous communities. Brazil's got a lot of countries on its borders, including Colombia and Amazon. So indigenous communities are getting hit. And, you know, it's tough. Like, they have even less access to medical treatment than everybody else does in Brazil. And Brazil's medical infrastructure really isn't super great yet either. I think they're still qualified as a developing nation, if I'm not mistaken there. So yeah, it's not perfect. And it's kind of a scary time to see this.
Yeah.
Chris and Zoe were commenting that, you know, if we thought ayahuasca tourism is bad, imagine what it's like right now in Peru. Like how severely hit they're getting. How are they affording food? How are they affording shelter? It's really tough. And, you know, the lack of tourism has just dried up these monies that were coming in. And yeah, what do you do? I don't know. It's a scary scene. People wanted to go do ayahuasca in Peru. I don't know. Maybe you just give them money now and said, hey, like, I want to pay for a 2021 session or something, or 2022, just so you can maybe buy some rice for a couple months or something. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. How do you with a good conscience, support folks in Peru or in the Amazon basin? I'm not a charity expert, but you know, people are. So you can listen to a lot of people, read some books on that, and figure out how most ethically you can support those communities if you want to.
Yeah. I mean, that's just interesting because I know we brought that up, I think, in the beginning when all this was hitting. And I kind of brought that point up about just creating tourism in places where you create this infrastructure, and then what happens when it just stops, right?
Right. We saw it in Jamaica, like, or I don't know if we did, but Montego Bay used to be a really big cruise ship port. And that just collapsed when they built a new one over in Ocho Rios. So as a result, because loads of jobs went away from Montego Bay, and everybody's living in this city now with minimal work. So as a result, like, crime moved in, and drug smuggling and whatnot. So it's really, really a tough scene. Jamaica is getting itself back together, but not everywhere is when tourism collapses.
Did Zoe or Chris have any other interesting things to say about what's going on in the Amazon right now?
We'll have them on to really talk about it more in depth, but they were just talking about like total financial collapse, it seemed like. Not just in Iquitos, but do you remember the second biggest kind of ayahuasca city? I forget the name of it right now, but that city is also being hit really hard. And like, I don't know what the infection rates are like in Peru, but just the lack of tourism is just killing.
Says here on this NPR article with Brazil, they've already had around like 40,000 deaths. And they've already the third highest COVID death toll, second highest confirmed caseload.
Yeah. Scary, man. Like this could just keep going for years and years, and we don't know. Hopefully it mutates into something weaker, but time will tell.
See the new news article about a new swine flu that could lead to a pandemic.
Pretty fun.
God, what is 2020 already bringing us? It's kind of crazy.
Dumpster fire.
Yeah.
But it's interesting though, right? Like, how do we like get our shit together and still have happy, healthy lives? Like, I guess it's progressing you as an individual, you know, progressing your primary relationships, whatever those are, like family or otherwise. And I don't know, whatever your personal projects are. Like, for us, thankfully, we have this project, and we're quite well insulated from the virus.
Yeah. I think too, I was talking to somebody the other day, just even about like progress and like what is like success and work. Just thinking about like how much like, I guess, more yard work and things I've been just helping out around, and just thinking about how much work that is, or just like having a garden. I mean, like, wow, I could really just sit on doing this all day, but it doesn't really pay the bills or make money. So
Right.
from a cultural perspective, that's really not worth anything. And like when you really think about, I don't know, some of those more sustainable options, maybe you are spending a little bit more time working on some sort of sustainable land, or just these activities that are provide more purpose and meaning in your life.
Yeah.
Necessarily. So it's just interesting about thinking about value and what type of work do we value? It's, it's definitely not housework or, stuff things that like, maintaining life, right? I mean, it's like we devalue those activities that are what life kind of is at times.
Putting dishes away is still a pretty serious part of life. And, did you ever read Eckhart Tolle?
I never really got into him too much.
So it's just a different spin on Buddhism. It's like a guy with a cool accent that was on Oprah. And it's a particular form of Buddhism. It was great. It was just like mindfulness. Not too much more than mindfulness. And, when you're peeing, really just be there with peeing. When you're putting dishes away, be there putting dishes away. And it's like, there's something there. I found it really valuable when I was really focusing on that stuff. That said, I was probably having ayahuasca afterglow and doing qigong and all this other stuff on a regular basis that made things more magical. As well as having a spiritual practice. I'm starting to realize that my lack of a kind of daily spiritual practice is kind of adding up, especially in social isolation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, like just really suggest people try stuff, see what works for you, and hopefully something does work.
Yeah. Yeah. Just even interesting to reflect on like the running around and kind of day-to-day stuff that I was doing before all this happened. And then like the slowing down and being like, wow. I mean, obviously it's different being summertime and just being outside more, but just thinking about like, wow, I've never actually done that much like yard work before and finding enjoyment in it. Like before it was always like, oh, I got to do this. And now I'm like, oh, there's nothing else to do. And this is really nice.
Yeah.
Or just like helping my folks out with stuff. I'm like, oh, wow. Like I'm actually slowing down to help my parents out with shit. And that's something I was like, I don't have time for that because I got to do all this stuff. And then it kind of comes back on like what's important in your life. And I was sitting there one night watching the sunset. I was like, how many sunsets are you going to be able to watch in your lifetime? How many more sunsets do you have left in your life? And just thinking about like, do people actually spend the time to watch the sunset? And just thinking about like, how many do you have left? Or how many more hours do you have left with your parents or friends?
There was this figure that Tim Ferriss threw out at one point on a show about like by the time you're 18, you've spent 98% of the time you'll ever spend with your parents or something. That's not the figure, but it's extreme like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
I was like, oh shit. That really puts it into perspective. Like I really should try to spend more time with them. And like thinking about my 20s when I just like was doing my own thing as much as possible, not spending any time with them. And like how much COVID's kind of stressing me out that I might not be able to see them for a year or two. Yeah. Creepy.
But yeah, I guess it kind of just puts things in perspective a little bit of like, I don't know, definitely has gotten me reflecting of how you want to spend time and this and that. But yeah, also, come back to the Amazon and indigenous folks. I wanted another hard hit community, it looks like as well, is Navajo Nation. I remember coming across some articles last week about that, and a friend of mine posted it on their Instagram story. I made some commentary, and I think I've made commentary about this on the show before, but just thinking about like holding dual narratives of coronavirus, spiritual emergence, spiritual awakening. It's like the shadow material emerging and it's allowing us to see this stuff. And then on the other side, people are suffering and people are dying. And I brought this to one of my teachers who is an elder, and I asked him, being a shaman or a shamanic practitioner, like, how do you view this? I'm sure, you have some sort of spiritual beliefs about this, and how are you holding this narrative? And of course, he threw it back on me to ask that question for myself. But, he finally just kind of turned around and said, sounds like a really privileged place to be, to view this as a totally spiritual experience. And what he followed up with was, I know plenty of people on the reservation that probably are not seeing this as a spiritual experience because they're already living in poverty. They're very vulnerable. Many people on the reservation are not in good health for the most part. And how hard hit are they going to be when COVID lands on their land? And that really kind of put things in perspective for me of being like, wow, yeah, how are vulnerable communities going to get hit even harder? And so, yeah, just even looking at what's possibly happening down in the Amazon, or what is happening down in the Amazon, and just seeing, these more impoverished communities get hit harder because they don't have the medical care and those infrastructures in place. And so while we get to maybe sit back and think oh, it's we can't go do this thing, or can't go out to the bar and drink. Just thinking about how much of a privilege that is to even just do that, right? Or just even to think about oh, this is a spiritual thing. Well, where are you in your life? Are you living out in the suburbs or out in the country where you're not getting hit, and so you have time to think about spirituality, versus maybe being in a community where this is starting to hit a little bit harder, and maybe you're not viewing it as deeply spiritual because you don't have that time to sit there and make that type of meaning out of it, I guess.
Yeah, I drove through Navajo Nation 3 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago or something, and it was really wild, and we knew how hard hit they're getting, and from it's just really creepy, really scary, sad. Yeah, it's a tough thing, and you're right, this perspective of spiritual awakening, it's well, from a certain perspective we might be able to take that position, but it's a real actual crisis for a lot of people that puts their lives, families, and lots at risk. Yeah, it's sad.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm guilty of that, sitting here talking about this kind of as a spiritual emergence to some degree, but also just reflecting on where I'm at, and I guess my own privilege to be able to even think about it in that capacity. So I think it's just important to raise that issue, and just to, if you're listening, just kind of think about that. What are some of your beliefs? Because I know the spiritual communities out there, and I think even parts of the psychedelic communities, a lot of funny things out there right now. And I think it's really important to sit back and try to view what some of your beliefs are, and from what perspective you're viewing those from, and where your privilege is, and how you're being able to view that as well. Because, I brought that up too with him. And I said, I get it. I've definitely been in those states where I see the destruction is rebirth. And if we come back to Whitehead, it's just life is perishing and becoming, right? So it's just this constant cycle of perishing and becoming. And so, all right, well, sounds like we're in a perishing moment right now, a lot of death and suffering, but what comes out of all that as well? So I get the meta, the big picture at times, but also how do we hold this actual reality and this narrative that there's actually a lot of suffering and death going on?
Right. And how do we include that in our speculative, spirituality and our philosophy too? Human suffering should play a big part of, or show a big part of your philosophy and spirituality. What do we do with that? How do we examine that? There's a lot there. And I want to say too, that you're not 100% wrong to have those speculations about a spiritual awakening, right? It's but it's just not necessarily relevant. It's something that people in, comfortable positions in the world, you have the opportunity to simmer on and talk about.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way philosophy's always been, honestly. Yeah. So,
it's just trying to figure out how to hold those dual narratives or multiple narratives, because they all have some truth to it, right? But it's how are you weighing it all, and how are you finding balance between it with just going on one side and being so extreme with it, with not even thinking that there's actually suffering going on, and being well, it's all all spiritual and everything's okay, but just being able to sit there and find balance between all those narratives and just, I guess, accept that it's all happening.
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to this post from Shroom Street. I need to pull that up. But essentially, he was talking about...
So this is a Twitter post.
Feed. Yeah. So let me pull up the handle here. It's just at Shroom Street. Super easy.
Yeah. And I have the tweet right here.
Cool.
The tweet says, "Why do you think psychedelic stocks continue to bleed?"
Right. So the name Shroom Street is kind of a play on Wall Street, also like State Street, just like kind of showing finance and psychedelics. So there's some interesting comments here. First one, MindMed is going up from the Daily Shroom. Another one, because no one needs NASDAQ to get shrooms. Yeah. But yeah, it's tough. The stock market's a tough thing. Pharma is a tough thing. Like stock valuations are typically like highly manipulated by public perception and by like press releases and like quarterly like earnings updates and projections. So like you do a quarterly meeting for your shareholders, like tell everybody what's going on. And then, that news gets out and people either want to buy or sell. And, the more people that want to buy, the higher the price. So, that's kind of what's going on there. Pharma takes a long time to push stuff through. And none of these companies are guaranteed to get anything approved. Like it appears as though MAPS will get something approved. It appears as though Compass Pathways will get something approved. But the others, it's not super obvious. MindMed looks like they've got a strong enough team to make it happen, but you still never know. Like they're looking at what psilocybin, LSD, and DMT right now, which hedging is great. Like if they want to be a profitable company, they should be hedging from different drugs and different indications. So,
well, it was interesting going back to that one article we shared. It was a psychopharmacologist talking about how getting new FDA approval might be difficult for psychedelics because I guess the process of needing to go through more novel treatments with novel compounds. I forget what he was saying there, but I know we talked about it a few episodes ago, and I found that to be really interesting. And it's like, just because Compass and MAPS and a few others are really pushing along, does that mean new companies will have the same opportunity to be able to go through those FDA trials? I don't know. I don't know that process well enough, but that's kind of what I took from that article that we were talking about a few weeks ago.
So like if psilocybin gets approved for treatment-resistant depression, would LSD be able to also be approved for that, right? Like that kind of a flow?
I think so.
The cool thing is, though, once we get these drugs approved for a certain indication, the off-label use is really good, assuming that happens. And LSD being wildly cheap, like, probably pharmaceutical grade LSD per session would be $100 maximum, seeing that street prices are like, what, $2 to $10. So like times 10 to get pharma grade seems logical. And, this is all speculative, everybody. Don't cite me in any papers on this, but yeah. So like there's good things coming, but we'll see. Like it's going to be a weird scene, but people are doing stuff like psilocybin for weight loss. So, if that gets approved, like the house of cards starts to fall down. And, what if we have just massive drug law reform? Like, what if politics got really sensible about drug reform and all this stuff just kind of got a lot simpler, a lot less illegal, if not illegal at all? The FDA kind of like chilled a little bit and kind of like relaxed laws. Like perhaps there could be some stuff there. I don't know. So it's an interesting deal with the stocks being kind of in trouble, but there's a lot of these companies coming to market. Like everybody's kind of coming, and
it's pretty amazing. I downloaded a PDF. I forget the company, but they tagged us something on Instagram, and it was a list of all.
The one that didn't list us?
Yeah, I made a comment on that. Like, oh, sorry, next time. It's like, tag us on Instagram, but don't list us there.
Right.
But I mean, there were so many companies on there that I haven't heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just really interesting to see all the privately and publicly held companies out there. And just, I mean, it's crazy to think about. Like a few years ago, you could only think of a handful of businesses or organizations doing this work. And now all of a sudden, there's just so many that are kind of just popping online. And like I said, things that I haven't even heard of. Like I looked at that, I was like, what is that company?
There's some speculation on this Twitter thread that a lot of these are potentially just fake companies, like pump and dump. Like, let's get it to the point where we can do a IPO and just sell on a stock market and then bail somehow, which love it or hate it. Like, there's some strong regulation on what you can and can't sell on the US stock market. And I think, part of that is protecting investors, protecting consumers from scams. Because there's been a lot of them, a real lot of them. If you look at the cryptocurrency world, tons and tons and tons of scams.
Yeah.
You might, I'll just say it. Dark web stuff. Like, a lot of these dark web markets will hold money and like be a functional market for a long period of time. And so they actually like hold your money. You like fill up your wallet on the site from your own wallets, and they hold it. You can withdraw it theoretically up until the point where they choose to exit. It's called an exit scam. So they keep all the funds that is in everybody's wallets from vendors and buyers. So it's a really interesting dynamic. So like on the dark web, you got to be really careful, everybody. Like, it's not all rainbows and kittens.
Well, there's a lot of that stuff even on the cryptocurrencies. I remember just hearing like a bunch of just interesting blockchain companies just selling their, what is that? Yeah, their ISOs, initial
ICO,
startup.
Yeah.
ICO.
Initial coin offering. Yeah.
Right. Oh, ICO. Yeah. And just creating that, making a bunch of money and then just fleeing and dropping.
And so this happened in the penny stock world. This happened in the stock market a number of times. Like, it's not uncommon. I don't want to say that these companies are all scammers, but there could be a couple. I don't know who. Like, I've not looked at all these companies carefully, but there's a lot of people coming to the party. And well, this is a good transition. Like, a lot of people are coming here. They're like, cool, money. And they don't really know what they're getting themselves into. Like, they don't know how kind of politically complicated the landscape is. They don't understand the racial components, the tribal components. There's just so much that folks don't really get as they come in. And, you were saying earlier, like you and I probably don't really get everything that's happening here, even though this is our daily life and it has been for years.
Yeah, I'll admit that sometimes I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And then, I mean, when even people are asking about like how to get involved and what to do, it's like, I have some speculation of where things could be going, but I mean, things are changing so rapidly. Oregon, for example, like it sounds like they might be getting their initiative on the ballot for November to legalize psilocybin for therapeutic use. And it's like, well, what happens if that gets approved? Then you don't have to go with a company like Compass to do their psilocybin training and be a therapist under them. Maybe that democratized the therapeutic aspect of psilocybin in Oregon. And what happens if other states follow through? I mean, we don't know. That's how I feel. Like, there's good ground, like I feel pretty confident with the mission of MAPS and what they're doing. And, I think they're just consistent and have been around for a very long time. But, anything could change, right? At the drop of the dime, something could change and just could all kind of go under again.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Like yeah. So like Kevin O'Leary, for instance, we'll go back to MindMed just because they're an obvious example.
Right.
Probably very minimal psychedelic experience. He's been mainly a business guy. Like, I don't think he necessarily, as an investor in MindMed, understands the complexities of this landscape.
Right.
And just kind of wants to minimize it. Actually, this is interesting. This is kind of that Newtonian Cartesian thing that we were talking about earlier with Lenny. But like how Newton would boil things down to like 1 to 2 things and make a model on 1 to 2 things. But those 1 to 2 things totally ignore the rest of the landscape, the total holistic picture. And that's kind of what's happening here. It's like, okay, like, doesn't matter. Can I make money? Probably. Okay, let's go. And we're going to patent it. We're going to push it through. We're going to do all this stuff and, try to maximize profits. And like, that's the number one thing with a lot of these investors. And it doesn't really fit well.
Right. I mean, I guess just like you talking about that has me thinking what Lenny was kind of talking about with the how, and with like the Newtonian Cartesian paradigm is just so focused on the how, on the mechanics of like, how does psychedelics work? Oh, okay, it can treat this, but how does it treat this? Versus thinking about like that idea of like final cause and thinking about the why. Why do these things exist? What is its purpose? And what is the potential implication here on a bigger level than just thinking about like this how and more of, okay, this thing does this thing, and that's all we're really worried about. Not thinking about that overarching why, like what is the purpose here? And I think that's what I come back to when I'm really cautious about saying, sometimes do we know what we're getting ourselves into? If we're going to unlock all these transpersonal states on a mass like scale at times, I think that kind of points to the why at times. Like, what is its purpose, and what is our purpose for doing this? Healing, yes, one thing, but like, I don't know. I think we're just so caught up on, this is something that can just work, and that's just what we're focused on. Not thinking about that, like, well, what are the other implications here?
Yeah. It's huge. It's really huge. Like, as excited as I am about this DMTX thing, could go really sideways. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. There's so much development we can do on these things. We could like bring them into like solve creativity problems, which really probably would save the planet really quickly if we were skillful with it. But, or the health and healing thing is pretty great too. Like, what if everybody just didn't have trauma anymore? But we have to scale that. We have to somehow get it affordable enough.
Right.
Which is a nice transition too, to our next topic of expensive retreats and expensive treatments. So like Solterra, which you went down to, is pricey and amazing, partly as a result of being expensive. And ketamine treatment centers, like I'm seeing, these kind of pump and dump kind of ketamine clinics going $600, $500 to $1,000 for an injection for a day. You're there for an hour and you leave. Like that's really tough for a lot of people to afford. Like I would hope a lot of these clinics are looking at affordability, but I'm not necessarily sure they are. And how do we address that problem of scale and access and also quality? Like if I was going to go to an ayahuasca place, I would probably go to Solterra, but it's not cheap. And how do you afford that? How do you make sense of it? And how does a poor person without the resources do that? I don't know. And what do you do about that? I also don't know. Like a lot of people say, oh, answer's simple. Anybody that's in the space needs to just give free services away all the time. It's like, I'm not really comfortable saying what people need to do other than if you're breaking really clear ethical rules. Other people are though.
Right.
I don't know. How do you feel about that? Like mandating that people do certain things with their profession. Yeah, it's kind of a complicated question, but I think you know where I'm going.
It's it's a tricky thing, right? I get it, to be able to serve communities, to be able to maybe sacrifice some of your own time to do pro bono work. But I mean, we have to look at like systemic things. It's like somebody that just went through school has massive amounts of loans to pay off. And how are they balancing that time and then paying the loan back? So then even just thinking about like education, why does education cost that much money? And should we be charging that much money for education that then perpetuates these high bill rates for things, right? If people didn't have so much debt, would they need to charge a shit ton of money for stuff? Or would they just like could you just orient towards living a more simpler life and just being okay with doing things on a smaller scale and just thinking about community action? So, I mean, it's a tricky thing, I think, to navigate. How many doctors have like over, I don't know, anywhere, probably like close to $500,000 in debt from going to med school, right? And how do you pay that off over time, right? And then to say like, oh, to do free work, I'm sure doctors and therapists would love to do free work. I mean, I'm one of those people that just like to help people, and I don't know how many free phone calls and free time I really give to a lot of people. And I hate charging for stuff like that. But then I'm like, and then I look at that loan and go, I got to pay that off at some point, or, oh man, like, yeah, I kind of need to pay rent plus that thing and all, so it's like, how do I balance that? And I had a teacher once kind of tell me the way he kind of operated was, I want to charge this higher price. And that allows for the people that can afford it to pay it. And that allows me to do more pro bono and more sliding scale fees. And so looking at people that are charging high prices, like, could those people also take into consideration like applying that to some pro bono work or to some sliding scale to be able to offer those services to people that really need it? And so I really like that model of being able to charge whatever price that is that helps you live. And if people can afford it, they'll pay it. And he was saying too, he's like, sometimes those people even want to pay more if they have that much money and they have that much resources, they're okay with usually paying that. And sometimes, they've been wanting to pay more. And that allows me to then be able to open my practice up to people that can't afford it. And so, maybe we have to be okay with accepting money from people, where those resources are. And then how could we create some time to then serve the people? I mean, like, one thing I thought about like retreat centers was sometimes these retreat centers are in places where there's a lot of poverty. You're looking at places in Peru and Colombia or like Jamaica, and it's just because the laws haven't outlawed these substances or plants, right? Or there's like legal gray areas where it's just accepted. And so that allows us to go down there to participate in this and spend the money. And I'm sure those retreat centers are very expensive to operate. When you think about the staffing, the groundskeeping, the food, but then you just see all the people around on the outside of those retreat centers, and you go, "Are they able to get healing? Like, could these retreat centers just like put off 1 week and say we're going to do stuff for the community around here, and we're not going to charge them full price?" And maybe you take a hit as a company for a week's worth of stuff to serve the people around you. And I think those are things that we should think about, like, how can we take hits, personal hits at times, to serve those that may not be able to have access to services.
Yeah, it's huge. Like, I don't have a good solution, but, we should still keep thinking about this. Like, I think everybody really should be able to access healing eventually. I think people shouldn't be starving to death either, but people are still starving to death. Like, I remember Kwasi at one point was like, should we bring psychedelics to minority communities for healing? It's like, well, why not bring regular mental health services first? Like, it's kind of like, let's start with clean water as opposed to like, let's give them a road that they didn't want, like, how do we balance what's the cheapest, lowest hanging fruit that's going to give the best reward? Like, clean water is kind of number one. Sanitation, number two. Like, I wouldn't want to open up an ayahuasca retreat center in Ethiopia. I'd want to do a lot more kind of like basic infrastructure work first.
Right. But I have heard like some of those retreat centers actually brought infrastructure to some of those impoverished communities, which is a plus, right? So it's this weird paradoxical balance that we have to approach it, right? It's like, because that tourism has brought the infrastructure, which brought the clean water, but now all of a sudden maybe you're seeing wealth accumulate in just a concentrated section. I don't know. Just even thinking about like COVID, for example, like when everything started to shut down and people were getting unemployed and thinking about like having to pay rent, right? And just thinking about how do you pay rent if you're unemployed? And, maybe you didn't get unemployment or maybe not enough unemployment to pay rent. It's like, how are we all in this together? And how do we take a hit together? How does the landlord take a hit? And how does the big banks take a hit and be like, hey, we're all in this together. And maybe we're all going to just call it a personal hit for a month or two.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's a big issue that we really need to stay on top of. My kind of basic explanation is that as new things come out, they're really expensive and they get cheaper in time as they scale. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get better, but look at, and I wouldn't say the stuff happening right now in the psychedelic space is anywhere close to optimal, really. There's some really bad stuff happening. There's some great stuff happening, but on average, I don't think we're at the great point yet. So like look at Blu-ray or DVD when that stuff came out. It's like $1,000 for a DVD player or something crazy like that. Now it's like people don't even want a DVD player anymore. It's worth like $10. Right. So like,
right.
I don't want to try to like devalue psychedelics to that point, but there's something there. It's just at scale, things become cheaper, but mental health has never really been cheap either. Right. Like it's still kind of expensive to access mental health care. Any kind of health care, really. Like a therapist is cheaper than an MD, but still not cheap.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And then coming back to, I guess, like context of use, like, can we respect religious use? Can we respect peer use? And something Lenny mentioned was just like, yeah, psychiatry is like probably going to take hold of psychedelics. And what price does that come with? Right. Does that mean like, and I know I brought this up before. It's like, I know plenty of healers out there that didn't go down the conventional, Western healing route of education and getting a counseling degree or this or that. Maybe they couldn't afford it. Maybe they couldn't take out those loans. And then we kind of just go, oh, well, they don't have any letters behind their name, so they don't really know what they're talking about. Or, oh, they took like a Reiki training, what does that really mean? And putting these professions on pedestals. And I mean, how do we I always come back to education. I mean, how do we make education cheaper? Why does it cost so much money to go to school? How do we educate more people to go out there and do the work instead of kind of like gatekeeping it in a sense and making it very unaffordable for a lot of folks? And then those folks are just left to, not participate. And I think that's what we're going to see in psychedelics as it starts to take off when it's very medicalized and, only the therapists or the psychiatrists like get to use it. And I get it. Like I went to school for this stuff and I'm like, ooh, I could have a career in here. And, there's parts of me where I'm like, yes, the therapist should only be able to use it because we're trained that way. But, then I have to do a lot of self-reflection and be like, well, what's my motive here? Why am I thinking that way? And do I actually believe that? Or do I just believe that is because institutions have told me that I've earned this and this is the way it's going to go? And how do we like democratize it a little bit more and allow people to find their own healing, right? And I get the fear, right? Oh, somebody might have like a bad trip but how do we educate people? And I think that's what we're trying to do here at Psychedelics Today is just like be honest about all this stuff and try to educate people about like the harms and safety aspect. And how do we bring healing to people instead of trying to like block it off? And again, all right, I'm speaking out against my own profession at times, right? And criticizing it. But I mean,
I think it's important.
I think we have to ask those questions.
Like I'm not anti-psychiatry. I'm not anti-therapy. I'm just saying there's plenty of critiques here that we need to make. Psychiatrists are doing amazing work, though there's massive room for improvement, and they know it. They just don't necessarily like to admit it because the whole industry field is under attack often.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not shitting on it. I'm just, I have to do my own self-reflection when I'm thinking about this stuff, because there are definitely times like I've brought this up, like this total bias of like this inner work type of mentality. I've always approached this stuff from a therapeutic kind of point of view. And then talking to people in the recreational setting, like that's been like a hard thing to kind of transition to and be like, oh, wow, people have actually found some therapeutic benefit in a recreational setting. maybe it doesn't always need to be so guided. And what's my own bias there? Why am I always saying like, this is the way it needs to be? You know, like who am I the hell to put guidelines around that?
Right. Like where, to bring capitalism back in, the line is like the market's never wrong. Like there's such a huge recreational market for psychedelics and similar drugs like MDMA that like, is it really incorrect? Like people want it. Why do they want it? What's missing? Like alcohol is not very fulfilling. LSD can be very fulfilling. At a Grateful Dead show, in the woods, camping, on a hike, just chilling at home with friends, you know, like there's so like, it can also be problematic. So, you know, education programs probably would be really helpful. And that's kind of, I think, how we fit in, right? Like it's a philosophy thing, that could be helpful for both recreationalists and people providing therapeutic experiences, and the experiencers themselves too. Like, it helps to have some education before you go see God, you know?
Right.
It's like what happens to your brain after that, you know, or your mind, sorry.
Yeah.
The brain word is tough.
Yeah. But on the flip side, you know, just talking about professions and loose regulation, there's benefit to that, obviously, right? To be able to have education systems where it's very regulated and you have to go through a lot of these processes to kind of get through, shows a level of commitment and it holds, you know, fields at high esteem. And I think that's important. So one thing to highlight that loose regulation, look at the coaching industry. Right. I mean, anybody can really call themselves a coach. And I definitely see a lot of coaches out there do mental health work. And, you know, sometimes that gets into like tricky territory at times, especially when you're dealing with like things like suicidal ideation or like really extreme states where it's like, you know, do you have training in that? And if you didn't go through, I don't know, maybe some coaching programs go over like how to like mitigate that, or maybe how to refer out to appropriate services. But anybody can really call themselves a coach and do that type of work. And so I get it on that side as well, of having too loose of regulations and kind of structure, and then what type of injury is going to happen, right? And I think that's why we've really built structure over professions over the time to really mitigate any risk and harm, right? I mean, that's why the FDA started, right? To try to build safety around drug development. Because what was that drug that kind of started that off?
Thalidomide.
Yeah.
Thalidomide. Thalidomide, which I think was a sedative drug discovered at the end of the 50s. I'm reading this now, which caused a worldwide tragedy. It was prescribed to many women in order to relieve pregnancy nausea. Yeah. So it's tough. Yeah. But there's other drugs out there that could really cause a lot of harm too. So like, why should psychedelics have an exception? Like that's a really big thing to ask. You know, like we should still follow the rules, but you know, anything that was done before like 1970s, like isn't counted as science anymore. Like it just doesn't count because of the methodology. It's like, well, no, come on guys, science can do better than that. Like think about the people that could be helped as opposed to like how accurate your data is, you know.
Right.
When the sample set's that huge, like Saskatchewan, for instance, saying LSD is now the standard of care for alcoholism, essentially, like what caused that and why? And should we have looked more seriously at that? Should Canada have put up more of a fight on the drug war? Should Saskatchewan have, you know, like what happened to like the people with alcohol use disorder in Saskatchewan after that? Like, we had healed all these people and now nobody can get healing. They have to go to meetings, which meetings are okay, but it's not perfect. Look at me saying LSD is perfect. I don't always mean it.
Yeah, I don't know. These are tricky things to navigate, I think. I mean, there's just a lot of paradox, right? Like, I don't know. I always kind of can see or try to really view it from all these different perspectives and sides. And maybe that's why I never really stand firm on anything so solid. I'm always trying to view other sides at times and see the different opinions and whatnot.
Totally. All right. So,
but yeah, how do we make psychedelics more accessible? I think that's just what we keep coming back to, right?
Right. Like, is it necessary that doctors and therapists are the ones facilitating? I think not. Lenny keeps coming back to like the religious angle. Like, maybe pastoral counseling is the best place for it. Like, a community pays for these pastors, and the pastors could be leveraging this stuff and offering it for very discounted fee because they're essentially already got a salary going.
Mm-hmm.
Or figuring out group use would be really nice. Like, I think there's some really interesting, like, as we've been talking to Raquel Bennett, there's some really good like group use cases for ketamine that I think it's a lot easier to handle perhaps than tryptamine group sessions, which there's, a lot more projection and active stuff happening, as opposed to ketamine where it's just like, okay, go to sleep now, but you're having this big, massive experience. And yeah. So there's something there. It's probably with group. It's going to be with not therapists being the sitters there the whole time. But, we still have to deal with the FDA and getting through these drugs through.
Well, yeah, and I think something that I come back to, like when Lenny makes that comment about like pastoral counseling, because I remember when he first said that, we were at I think it was just like a weekend workshop, and just talking about like how we're just really viewing psychedelics to help treat some sort of psychopathology, and that just seems very limited at times, and that these are like just tools for psychopathology. And really thinking about some of these deeper existential questions and what type of experiences are elicited through psychedelics. And, you look at Johns Hopkins with the mystical experiences. I mean, this is pretty well documented, right? Or just even thinking about psychedelics in religious context, and people have like mystical healing. What is that? Like, how does that then help us redefine what psychopathology is? And at the root of it, what is depression? What is anxiety? Are some of these actually like existential and philosophical issues, religious issues? And so how does psychology deal with some of that stuff, right? And that's why I think like just being able to figure out like all these different use cases is important. Somebody has a religious experience with psychedelics, and then they realize like, oh, like I've been depressed because like I feel like I haven't been in touch with myself and my communion with God, right? And then they rediscover that relationship, whatever that higher being is, and they went, wow, I've found much more meaning in life. Or like, wow, I got connected with nature, and I feel like nature was always dead to me, but now I realize it's a little bit of alive, and I have a little bit more meaning in my life. So
the betterment of the well. Yeah. And, like we all have this kind of subtext of religious stuff here. Like, you've had a pretty extraordinary religious experience that you've talked about a lot. A lot of us kind of think that we can get enormous insights into reality that totally transform our lives, even if we're not sick.
Yeah.
Like acutely ill with a diagnosis, like you're still diagnosed, you're still terminal by being a human. Like, you still got to deal with existentialism and beyond. So yeah, there's just, I think this is why we like philosophy, right? Like, there's, how do we account for these weird transpersonal experiences? What does it actually mean? Like, is God a real thing? Is like, how do I relate to the soul? How do I relate to God if God exists? These big questions. There's a lot of value in wrestling with them.
Yeah. And like, I just think back, like when my path really started, like with my near-death experience. I mean, I mentioned I was on a high for a bit, and then I fell into a very deep depression and a lot of suicidal thinking. And I still have my bouts of depression and anxiety, and psychedelics haven't completely healed those, and breathwork hasn't completely healed it. And sometimes I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Like, oh, I think I have it figured out. And then other times, but when I come back to it, I always come back to this near-death experience and what it opened me up to. And that opened me up to wrestling with these big existential questions. what am I doing here? What's my sole purpose? Like, what are we doing here as a species? Are we just here to destroy the planet? Are we here just to constantly like consume and perish? Like, why do we have these systems in place that, just continue to oppress people or to capitalize off of people? Can we change? Can we create a new system? Why do we believe in the systems that we believe in? Why are you so fixated on that idea? Can you think about it differently? I mean, I went down just a rabbit hole of thoughts of trying to figure out, like, why are we in the position that we're in? I think sometimes we've boxed ourselves into some crazy belief system and we have such a hard time breaking free and thinking, there's actually another way. There's another way that we could live, but we're just really afraid of living that life because it's going to take a radical change. And at the core, I mean, this stuff just keeps coming back up in my life and I cannot push that experience away. And I think at the core of it, I think I've always been really interested in philosophical thoughts from that experience, but thinking about some of the existential angst, that's what drives some of my depression and anxiety, is thinking about these big problems. Do I think I'm like I have some sort of chemical imbalance from psychopathology or like the medical paradigm? Maybe there's, that enough thinking creates that, or environmental things end up creating that. But I think at the root of it for me is like these deep philosophical questions. And I think that lies in the realm of religion, spirituality, and philosophy, not so much psychology. I mean, psychology can help us understand that, but psychology really hasn't taught me about psyche very much. I learned about psyche through mostly philosophy or some of these other psychologists like Hillman that incorporated a lot of philosophy into their work, archetypal stuff. I'm going on my rant.
No, it's good. It's good. Yeah. Like I had a conversation with my father last night. I was talking to him kind of somewhat bragging about studying British empiricists. And he's like, why should people in the psychedelic space have any philosophical training whatsoever? And I was like, I had to actually think about it. I was like, well, kind of helps you sort out what's bullshit and what's not. Helps you get a little bit closer to what reality is, maybe, and helps you communicate ideas more skillfully. Like, okay, you had this experience, like Emanuel Swedenborg had this experience. This is how we think it can be contextualized, and perhaps this is a functional narrative for you to carry on with. Like people can get really diluted and like get to a point where logic's just 100% broken, like delusions of grandeur, like hyper paranoia that's not warranted. This stuff's out there. It can happen from psychedelic states.
Right.
Like, what does it mean that God talked to you in a session? Does that message from God need to be universalized to everybody? Or can you keep it for you? Mm-hmm. Just because an angel told you something doesn't make it like universalizable.
Right. Yeah.
And something you should force down people's throat.
Chris Killam just put out an article about visions being...
Not all visions are wise.
Oh, cool.
I want to check that out. I think he's starting a podcast. I don't know where he stands with that. And I'm excited for that. I like him and his perspectives. He's been around for a bit. It's kind of in that tradition of like Wade Davis. Who's the guy? Mark Plotkin and Chris Killam. Like really kind of great people. Yeah.
And we talk about this all the time with discernment, right? Like, how do you discern these experiences? Like, I've had a lot of crazy experiences, transpersonal experiences, and sometimes I don't know what to make of them. And I sit there and just scratch my head and I just go, what the hell is that all about? How do I make sense of that? And I have to sit there and question. I'm like, did I believe that? Like, do I believe that? And what parts of it do I believe to be truth? And what other parts are maybe just some weird noise that came up, right? Like, so discernment's a huge thing for me. It's how do you discern like what is really going on at times? And it was really interesting today during our philosophy chat with Lenny. He was bringing up past life experiences and like suggesting, I don't think Whitehead had really talked about past lives, but just even from a Whiteheadian perspective, that the past is all there and it is possible to relive a past life. Maybe it wasn't your life, but it's a memory of a past life. And I've definitely had those past life experiences and breath work and other transpersonal experiences. And there was something like, I don't think I've like, there were times I've attached to them and said, oh, like I was that person back then, but maybe I wasn't. Like maybe I was just reliving an experience and that happened in history. And I was getting a glimpse from that person's perspective in history. And then I always have to come back and be like, do I believe I was that person in a past life? Maybe, maybe not. How did that experience feel for me? It was informative. What did it teach me about the past, or what is it teaching me about the present moment right now? And really just asking a lot of questions about those experiences instead of just saying like, oh, that was an experience that I had and that is truth, right? I think it's important to really question a lot of that stuff. And I think, I don't know, I've always been a little on the skeptical side, and there are definitely times where I feel very firm in what I believe spiritually and when I think about that spiritual experience. But there's other times where that near-death experience, like, I just have no idea what the hell that was all about, you know? And it's, I don't know how to make sense of that. It's just.
Right. Yeah. All right. So we have one last topic to cover, Kyle. Great news out of Oregon that IP34, the ballot initiative to get legal psilocybin therapy on the ballot, they're really optimistic they got enough votes or enough signatures. They need to work through all the stuff they collected and verify that the signatures are valid. Once they do that, it's official that they'll get it on the ballot. So they're really confident they've got enough signatures. And it looks like Oregon will be the first state to be able to vote at the state level if they want legal psilocybin therapy. Highly contentious. I've gotten in a lot of shit over this. Like, I think it's a great thing. Like, I think states should be experimenting with different ways of going forward. You know, yes, I want everything to be decriminalized. I want everything to be legal, really, personally. I don't think therapeutic use should be the only use case, but it's certainly a lot better than what we've got right now, in my opinion. So all sorts of organizations will be able to spin up offices out there to do this therapy. There's going to be a lot of ability for growers out there, and they're going to allow for natural mushrooms and various products. So like capsules, probably mushroom goo, probably like full plant extracts and
mushroom goo,
even totally synthetic psilocybin. Yeah. Have you seen the mushroom goo yet? Did you see that thread I spun up on the Facebook group?
I did. I've heard of it. It's just a funny thing to think about mushroom goo.
Right. It's like, 5 to 7 grams in the size of a really small Tootsie Roll.
What do they call it? Like the blue goo? Does it come out blue?
Yeah. I saw some not that long ago and it actually looked black, but it smelled like a wet bag of mushrooms. I was like, this is interesting. I didn't get a chance to try any. I might in the near-ish future, but we'll see. I'll report back. But it's an interesting concept. It makes it a lot more portable. So if you're, for those who don't like breaking the law, close your ears. It'd probably be a lot easier to smuggle around places. You know, if you're going to fly somewhere, like it'd probably be a lot easier than just having a loose bag of mushrooms. And, you know, it looks like candy. So, you know, what's the story? You know, and airport dogs aren't really looking for mushrooms. They're looking for cocaine, explosives, and weed, typically. Yeah. Probably other stuff that I don't even know about, but that's my sense of it. So I think it's a cool thing. Anyway, Oregon, great work so far. Let's see what happens. I'm excited for them. I would love to go get some legal therapy domestically. You know, funny thing is, it's still this dichotomy of it's legal at the state and municipality level, but federally still illegal. Yeah.
Could the feds come in and raid therapist's office if they knew they were doing that type of work? And I'd say probably yes, right? I mean, how many raids happened in California when they first started to legalize medical marijuana? And still, you know, recreational raids have definitely happened, I'm assuming, over the years. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I know, like, I've definitely have probably just touched on the critique of just keeping it within therapy within this podcast. But I think there is also somewhat of a benefit of that as well, kind of like that going slow. It sounds like they're going to, with the Oregon initiative, they're going to set up a lot of like their own systems and policies around it, which I think like being able to do it slow is a good thing. I mean, I don't know how many stories like we've heard from, misconduct and abuse happening. I mean, that's the one downside of religious use, right? And spiritual use is a lot of abuse and misconduct. I mean, it happens in the therapeutic space as well. But I think when you have that religious spiritual thing, nobody's really kind of looking over you, and a lot of weird stuff can happen in those circles as well. But, and I get some of the people's critique of like, why is it just to the therapist? Why couldn't we legalize it on everybody's, on the whole state end? But, I think moving forward with psychedelics, like going slow and really just trying to move at that pace could be beneficial. And also on the flip side, we need as much healing as possible right now in this time. And so also, how do we make it accessible? But, like what if Oregon like got this set up and they were to prove that this therapy is very safe and had a really great success rate? Like I know in this article, Sherry's pointing to the mental health crisis in Oregon, like the rate of depression and just all the mental health stuff that's going on over there. And we saw some drastic improvements. And would other states pick up on that? And then how could that then ripple out? And then as culturally, we started to become more comfortable with these types of experiences and this type of therapy, then how could we loosen that up even more to then broaden access? Peer support groups, or really being able to train people outside of therapy sessions to be able to sit for friends, like kind of get that Zendo level training to be able to sit for people. I mean, it's just going to take a while, right? It is kind of slow moving, but I think also important too to go slow. Yeah, 'cause they're saying a mandated 2-year development process. So they'll have all licensing, training, certification, ongoing education requirements for psilocybin service centers and facilitators. And again, I know some of the people that were critiquing it, it really comes back to access. How do we build in access to these systems? And I always come back to that education. Why does it cost so much at times? Can we make that a little bit more affordable so people can have access and get trained to be able to do this type of work? I think that's one of the fundamental driving points with me with all that is just the price of education. It's just ridiculous.
Right. So it's a 2-year process that they're going to have to figure all this stuff out. And the names will be public. So you can talk to these people on the board and, address them, hopefully skillfully. Don't just harass them. Be like, hey, I have some concerns. Can we have a chat? And odds are they're probably not going to talk to everybody, but odds are they're going to want to talk to a lot of people so they can bring more kind of validated feedback back to the board, back to, the government. So if access is a big deal, like maybe the state can have an access fund. Like maybe everybody that's selling these services and goods, chips in 1% to 5% at, the state tax level just for mental health services. And maybe that's a good thing. So these kinds of things are possible. Like laws are really fluid. The laws of nature are a lot more stubborn than government laws.
That's true.
So yeah, like we can manipulate laws. And if you want to get active, get active. Like others are like, I don't want government mushrooms. Like I have a friend that refuses to drink quote unquote government water, which is so funny to me. All he drinks is like LaCroix and other kind of fizzy drinks, like seltzer waters. I'm like, this has been going on for at least 10 years. Hardcore libertarian. I think he was tapped for a Senate seat at one point. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? But anyway, that kind of sentiment exists in Oregon too. Like, I don't want the government to ever see my mushrooms. Like, I want to be able to grow mushrooms at home, not be afraid of a raid, like just grow enough for personal use. And that's it. It's like, perhaps like we still know that Drug Policy Alliance is working on their own initiative to legalize everything, or at least decriminalize everything Portugal style.
Mm-hmm.
So like that thing is happening domestically too.
Yeah.
So it's like, great. Like they're going to do the therapy thing, but also have decriminalized or legalized everything. Like spot on. Like that's a great move to have both.
Yeah.
I don't see why they're exclusive. No one's been able to explain that to me yet.
Yeah. But I mean, that comes...
They've tried.
It comes back to a good point of like, we just need to really think about all these use cases, and some people are going to need therapy, and like, how do we just, Drug Policy Alliance, like just legalize or even just decriminalize to then we're not arresting people. So, maybe the person that has had mushrooms in the past that feels pretty confident in going on their own inner journey feels okay with just having them around without that fear of getting in trouble, right? And the person that's never had an experience, that is working through a lot of trauma or whatever, any sort of serious mental health, like that, they have the option to go to the therapist, right? Something came up quickly, and I know we're well over time. Today we're just riffing. But somebody mentioned to me a little bit ago about how they love ketamine psychotherapy because they feel much safer knowing that if something happened with them and their therapist, they could report them. If something happened to them in the underground, which I guess it happened, who do you go to?
We've heard too many stories of people getting abused.
Yeah.
I think I told you, but like right around the time of Horizons last year, I was having like a crisis because of just balancing people going kind of hard on us and me like also being kind of somewhat blocked from reporting stuff. And, essentially I was just going to make a big stink about some people who are actively sexually assaulting young women while in session, in psychedelic sessions. And I'm like, I don't know, like why, like at a certain point when you've harmed people enough, they don't deserve your protection or discretion anymore.
Yeah.
Like, you're not on the same team anymore when you're doing harmful stuff to people. Are you considered a narc at that point and not trustworthy when you want to out people for doing really harmful stuff? I don't know. We've been silenced on other things too via legal means, or like at least not necessarily legal means, but like the possibility of strong legal force shutting down psychedelics today. So like, it's really frustrating. I was ready to just walk from psychedelics altogether. I'm like, all right, no, just everybody's an asshole. There's no hope. I'm out. But when there's regulation and you can actually say, hey, licensing board, this happened, do your thing. People get removed, have their licenses removed all the time. Like we know people that have lost their licenses.
And that's the benefit of regulation and having that structure and having those institutions in place, right? So I get it from those different perspectives, but that really just stood out. This person was really grappling with what happened in the underground and had nobody to report it to. And how do you report that? Because then you're admitting to your own activity. But doing something legal above ground with somebody that has a license and has some sort of board overlooking them, it's like, oh, this happened. I'm going to file a report. They can do an investigation and we can go about it in a different way. And so, I feel like that feels much safer for clients, especially if there's an abuse history, right? Instead of just going into the underground and not knowing what the hell is going to happen. Or just even thinking about safety, right? Like just seeing a lot of people gather right now for different kind of ceremonies. And then just thinking about like ketamine practitioners and people that are doing psychedelic therapy, like rigorous like safety protocols, right? And really thinking about client safety versus being more in that spiritual shamanic container where it's like, oh, come, the medicine will just heal us, and not really probably taking into consideration some safety protocols of, like, the other day, like we've been really chatting with Lenny and Elizabeth, like no breath work for a while. And that's really tough to sit with. I'm like, oh God, like, this is really hard. And, I saw an Instagram post of somebody in Florida where they're like, come to like this hot yoga studio. We're going to be doing breath work in the hot yoga studio. If you're symptomatic, just don't come. But saying nothing about like wearing a mask or doing any of that other stuff. And it's just like, that seems really dangerous for your clients, the people that are coming to you. Why put everybody at risk like that? Just crazy.
The culture in Florida around COVID is really tough right now. Always has been, right? Did you see any of the video from the rallies?
I don't think
Anti-mask rallies. The first clip was like, I don't wear a mask for the same reason I don't wear underwear. I like to let it breathe. It's like, good Lord.
Oh, is that like
this
the
to,
actual
the Senate?
hearing? Where people are getting up like one by one, and I think so. A couple memes went around. They're like, "This is like a live episode of Park and Recs."
it's actually spot on. I never even thought of that.
They actually took some of those clips and lined it up with like Parks and Rec, and it's pretty funny. But and I get it. Like COVID has turned into this weird political thing where a lot of people don't believe in it and don't believe in like the whole mask thing. I don't know how to approach that. It's tough.
And on the far side, I had a conversation with a gentleman from your neck of the woods that was out here recently. And he was talking about how, through good karma, like you are not going to be infected by COVID. And like, what? Are you serious? Like, this is a virus. This isn't like, sure. Yeah. Everything's spiritual for sure. But it doesn't mean that physics doesn't operate normally. And biology doesn't operate normally. It's like, well, yeah. Like perhaps there's some spiritual experts out there that can clear this stuff up. I'm not going to hold my breath on that. Knowing those people is, I'd love to know them, but I don't think there's, more than 100 of them worldwide. The odds of me finding that person is really low. Yeah. So it's tough. The far out spiritual folks just being kind of deluded too. It's tough. Mm-hmm. I don't know what to do about it other than sit tight, hold my breath, try not to get sick again. Didn't realize the death rate was so high.
Right. I mean, you probably had COVID, so that feels probably very real to you that, hey, this is a virus. I got really sick. I mean, you said like you were knocked out.
It was really fucked up. It was not good. Like any flu I've had, like puking for 5 days was way better than what I had. And I can't even believe that I can say that.
Jeez.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it really hits close to home. Like our buddy Franklin, it sounds like he had it. Like it's really creepy to know who had it and like, the problems that could come from that, like permanent damage, if not just death.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who is that doctor we had on recently? Mark, the guy from Canada.
Mike Hart.
Mike Hart. Yeah. His commentary and like mentions of like vitamin C and vitamin D deficiency leading to like worse outcomes.
Yeah.
Like, like the correlations to death and low vitamin D and C, like, that's something we should look at. Perhaps folks look up those articles and studies that came out. I think it was University of Dublin maybe put out a really big one. And there's other studies coming out too. So if you're at risk, like a lot of people still have to go to work. Even if you're wearing a mask, you're still at risk. So perhaps like look at what else you can do. Maybe it's those like plastic face shield PPEs plus a mask, plus supplementation, plus like being wildly paranoid about what you do with your hands. All that. Yeah. Be safe. Like the psychedelic renaissance still needs you. The world still needs you. So does your family and friends. So, take care. Like be really careful out there. It's not a safe scene. I wish it was. Yeah. All right, man. How are you feeling about wrapping up?
Good. Yeah. We're over time and it's getting dinner time here. So I need to eat.
Right on.
But
cool. So this is fun. We've got new dates out for navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. Starts September. I think it's the Thursday after Labor Day. Is that right?
17th, I believe.
September 17th. Yeah, that sounds right. You can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. I'll tease you by saying there's some big announcements that we're going to make public pretty soon, hopefully, about it. So expect to be hearing us excited
I guess
about
we
it.
could give a little hint, maybe.
Yeah, go for it.
Like,
whatever you feel safe saying.
Yeah. Well, we did get approved for our July cohort for CE credits. So it's looking pretty positive that we will have CE credits for September. So definitely check that out. If you sign up now and there's nothing about CE credits on there, I'll follow up with some links. It's just going through the approval process. But since our July one got approved, I don't think there's any reason why September shouldn't get approved. So yeah, so that will be 12 CE credits, and that is for the live online component of our course. So
For who?
Yeah, I'm for, let's see, the Spiritual Competency Resource Center is our co-sponsor, and they're approved for CE credits for psychologists, I think RNs and licensed marriage and family therapists, and I think LPCs in the state of California. And then, you know, if you're outside of California, just check with your local boards about the course and whatnot. But also, if you're curious, just send me an email. I have the information about that as well.
Cool. Yeah. So really excited about that. It'll be a small upcharge. We're not going to try to make much money on that part. So if you want to learn more, email us, psychedelicstoday@gmail.com, or there's a contact form on our website. But yeah, we'd love to have you in the class and really excited about this. So yeah, again, psychedeliceducationcenter.com, navigating psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. And yeah, I think we're good now. Thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you.
And Joe and Kyle signing off. We'll see you on Tuesday. Bye-bye.